Hi, this is Misha, in kind of our continuing revisiting of some of our older videos and guns. We're on to part 2, looking at Swedish guns. Part 1, we had the early Mausers, the M94 carbine, along with the M9414, and the M96 long infantry rifle with mention to the M96B. Today, we have the M38 short rifle and the AG42B, often known in America as the Ljungman. So, in the first video we talked about how Sweden adopted the 6.5x55 cartridge and the Mauser 93 pattern with a few modifications. The M38 is really just an attempt to slightly update and modernize the existing design. After World War I, most militaries were switching over to so-called short rifles, which split the difference between carbines and infantry rifles. You saw some before World War I, such as the American 1903 Springfield and the British SMLE Mark III. However, other nations like Germany, France, and Russia were still using the more traditional long infantry rifle with a barrel between 29 and 31-ish inches. At the time, carbines would typically have a barrel in the 17 to 19-inch range, where a short rifle, such as this, would typically have a barrel in the 24 to 26-inch range. And this one is on the 24 side, so it's a slightly shorter short rifle. This is of the B pattern, like we talked about in video 1. So it's an M38B where the barrel was threaded for a blank device. This is an aftermarket, I'm sure, cover, but I don't like having bare threads. Also having there we go. Also having threads there makes attaching a bayonet difficult. So what is this and how is it different from the 96? Really, it's just the shorter barrel. We went from a 29-inch to a 24-inch barrel. We cut it down, we relocated the front sight, shorter cleaning rod, same bayonet lug system, shorter stock of course, bottom sling mount, shorter upper handguard, still have a relatively tall rear sight. When these were first adopted, we were still using the original M94 round-nosed cartridge bullet, finger grooves, straight wrist stock, Mauser action. In fact, the first 55,000 or so M38s were simply 96 rifles cut down by 5 inches. So these will be Gustav. The reason I have this gun, it's kind of interesting. Most of the cut down guns, which collectors sometimes refer to as M9638, retain the straight bolt handle. While this is a Gustav, it has the turned down bolt handle, and this is matching serial to the gun. I thought that was kind of interesting, that's why I hung on to it. Nice gun. Very standard, and it was just Sweden's attempt to essentially modernize a bit with World War II on the horizon. I mean, most everyone who did not have their head in the sand in 1938 knew it was coming. So they would convert about 55,000 of their long rifles. Once the war kicked off, in 1942 through about 1944, Husqvarna would produce another 88,000 purpose-built M38 short rifles. And these would have the turned down bolt handle and a different type of wood to the stock. I should have looked before starting, guys. I forgot, sorry. The wood has a more of an oil finish. It has a little bit different texture. Either way, you get the idea. So they would produce a decent amount of these before and during World War II. Still under 150,000, So really not that much more than the M94 carbine. Of course, the M94 is in production for a much longer time period. And these would supplement existing guns on the front line. A little shorter, a little lighter, much handier, and they would continue in frontline service until at least the 1960s. And again, with the long rifle and the carbine not really completely be retired out till nearly the end of the 20th century, right at the end of the Cold War. Both the Husqvarnas and the Gustavs are outstandingly nice and smooth guns, good shooters. This really has about the same accuracy as a long rifle. We're not really losing much except for a slightly shorter sight radius, so on and so forth. But that was really a stopgap. At the same time this was going into manufacture, work was already underway to make a self-loading rifle. Now this needed to be a full infantry rifle firing the 6.5 cartridge. And the very first attempts, they were just going to essentially try to rework the Mauser to be a self-loading gun. Well, these did not go anywhere. So, around 1940, Erik Eklund would begin work on what we call in the USA Ljungman or Ljungman rifle. However, this name is really kind of unknown as to why it was applied to this gun. I'm sure it has something to do with an early importer, because Ljungman was simply a factory, but they weren't the ones who actually manufactured these. That would be Carl Gustav. Some design work was done there, but when it came time for manufacturing, these are Gustavs. This is actually why Husqvarna would be doing the M38s from 42 to 44, because Gustav was busy with other projects, including the AG42 as it was known. This gun is remarkable because it was adopted very quickly. It was designed in 1940, 1941, and was officially adopted, went through trials very quickly in 1942. Now you would think this would be just a hot mess, especially during the war, but it actually is a very solid rifle. Now it is heavy. When I say solid, I mean literal. It's not light. We have a slightly longer barrel at 25 inches. It's also ported here to help with recoil. We have a protected front sight, cleaning rod. That actually changed in the 1953. We'll get to in a bit. It takes the same bayonet. I'm going to point this at you as the Mauser. We have a similar profile to the front forestock here, including a short upper handguard. Of course, it's a little different for the gas system. We have a pistol grip style stock finally. It's very thick, very patterned after the Grand. In fact, the stock back here is very grandish. This is a true direct gas impingement gun. This was not at all the first direct gas impingement gun. In fact, France had been working with this system on and off since around the turn of the century with the INT prototypes. That is my cameraman farting, apparently. And they, even though in France they would go to the piston system, as with most other places, Sweden would go to the direct impingement because it was simple, well, and direct. Now the bolt in here is actually a tilting or tipping bolt that was more or less borrowed from the Russian SVT40. And as I said, the stock design and so on. So they were happy to borrow, but it has a very unique action. I'll show you in just a minute. These would go into production in 1942. Most would be built in 1943, and they would build some more in 1944. By 1945, they were out of production. There are reports of a tiny number of 1945 dated AG42s. They would build about 30,000, which, as you note, is a very small number. I mean, that's smaller than any of the other guns we've talked about here. That's because this was never meant to replace the good old Mauser. It was meant to supplement it. It was meant to give the frontline troops in Sweden a modern advanced weapon. We're firing 6.5 with a detachable 10-round magazine, although this was meant to be topped off by chargers, Mauser stripper clips. And this was basically just it was a deterrent gun, just to make sure that Germany didn't get any ideas. I can't imagine why Sweden wasn't really trusting of Germany in that era, can you? Not like they ever had treaties and reneged on them. Russia. So this was just to give the soldiers a little extra edge. They did a few other things in their military. And obviously it definitely helped. Sweden was never invaded by Germany, so it didn't hurt. It gave them a very good gun. But as soon as the German threat was no longer present, as soon as Germany was fighting a defensive war, they scaled back production on these quite quickly because they really didn't need them. The Mauser was perfectly fine as a weapon for a defensive army, cheaper, and it was also much easier to train soldiers on how to use. A note about the ammunition too. In 1941, a new type of cartridge, 6.5 by 55 M94/41, which was a Spitzer bullet, was introduced. The AG42 from the beginning was calibrated to fire both the older round nose bullet and the new Spitzer, and the Mausers would follow suit. So this could fire both types of the cartridge in service. These, even though production would end by 1945, would remain in service, again with the more frontline elite units, for a long time. And in fact, there was a major refurbishment and upgrade program in 1953, which is where this version comes from here, the AG42B. They would make many changes, and I'm sure I'll forget some here, but a few included a stainless steel gas tube for better corrosion resistance and easier cleaning. They would also upgrade the rear sight with this windage, or not windage, but elevation knob here, making it easier to do than the old Mauser style, especially when wearing gloves. They would go away from the original cleaning rod and equip it to use the same cleaning rod as the M38. Originally, this dust cover here would have serrations here on these pads to grasp it with. They would put plates over with these very large, bulbous, and serrated on the sides nubs for easier, more secure charging. We would improve the extractor. We would also strengthen the return spring for better reliability, especially in the cold. And we would add this rubber brass deflector. And as I said, I'm sure I missed some, but that gives you an idea. This is an AG42B, as most all are today. Of the 30,000, virtually all of them were converted and upgraded. There was just a handful left. So I said this feeds from a 10-round mag. It's quite interesting. We have a catch in the back, which is always there. We added a front catch to the mag during the B upgrade as well. Let's look at that for a second before we get to the guts of this critter. We have a traditional lug in the back. Now what's interesting about this first catch, it's actually not on the gun, it's on the magazine. That was just a secondary catch to make sure it wouldn't fall out and get lost in the snow or leaves or whatever. As I said, this was mostly meant to be charged by clips. Now, the action on this is extremely unique. I'm going to make sure my hand is far away. Pull this. This is your cover. You can see inside the trigger group there. Pull it back. And that's your action. Yeah. Interesting system, but as you notice, there's no way to arrest this bolt and bolt carrier going forward. So if you realize your finger or anything else you don't want bruised is in the way, there's really no way to stop it except maybe prayer. See how that works for you. Yeah, it makes M1 Grand Thumb, I don't know how to say it. I mean, that would honestly send you to the hospital. Let's see. Got a little Q-tip out here. Let's see what that does to that. Of course, now I've jammed up my action, but that's alright. Come on. That thing is completely mean. And these are not soft Q-tips. What happens there, you see that little half moon shape, that's the gas tube and the port and everything. It's sharp edged, it's tapered, and it will get you. So what they did, put it on safe and you're good to go, because it's not hitting the catch to release the bolt. So if you own one of these and charge it with stripper clips, that's fine. Have it on safe, because if you don't, put it on fire, there you go, and it would not take much. Consider that my public service announcement for the day. Make sure to use the safety. Not only is it for safety reasons, it makes sure the bolt won't eat your hand. Mags go in very easily. You wouldn't think so with two catches. They're pretty much a straight in. Got a little bit of a curve to them, but not much. As you saw, it has a Mauser-inspired safety, but located differently. So yeah, that was the AG42, AG42B. Now these would stay in frontline service relatively briefly, because we're firing 6.5. That's a large cartridge. The gun is very expensive to mass produce by the standards of the Cold War era. It would quickly be replaced by the AK4, which was a Swedish licensed copy of the G3. And then that in turn would give way to the AK5, which was a variant of the FNC in the 80s. That's a story for another day, though. These would still stay in inventory for quite some time, and then they would be sold off as surplus. Many would end up here in America. These are not terribly uncommon guns. Also, Gustav would sell the production line, quite famously, to Egypt, who would build two models from this, the Hakim in 8mm, and the Rashid in 7.62 by 39. Quite interesting, and we have videos on those guns, so definitely check those out. But this is where it began with the Ljungman, and that was pretty much the beginning and end of this whole family. But a cool part of self-loading rifle history, and it's remarkable that Sweden was able to field something so reliable, durable. Yes, it's heavy, yes, it's relatively expensive to manufacture, but for World War II standards, honestly, it was better than the G41, arguably better than the G43, better than the SVT38. I would say better than the SVT40, especially if you get rid of this weird charging system and use a more conventional style. Really, the only guns that were on par with it during the war would have been the French MAS-40, which did not go into production until 1945 as the MAS-44, which is also a direct impingement, by the way, and the US M1 Garand, which, while an excellent weapon, it was adopted in 1936 and wasn't really perfected until 1941, when they went away from the gas trap system to the gas piston system. Again, this thing was thought up in 1940 and in production in 1943, and there obviously weren't major flaws because they didn't feel a need to upgrade or change the pattern for 10 years. So I just thought it was interesting. But the mainstay was still the good old Mauser, and by World War II, we're in the short pattern. While they would only make 30,000 of these guys, they would make nearly 750,000 Swedish Mausers between the German guns and the Swedish produced guns. So we have the Mauser produced guns, we have the Gustav guns, and we have the Husqvarna guns. So 3 factories. I think it was like 740 some odd thousand were built. 52,000 were given to Finland. The rest were kept in Sweden until they were sold off as surplus. Very excellent guns. if you have a chance to pick one up for a good price, for a long time these were excellent values. They were kind of with the Swiss straight bulls. You could pick one up for 100, 200, and then they jumped to about 300, 400, and now it seems like they're well over 600 for a nice one. German ones always bring more. It's also worth pointing out that some of these are under the law considered antiques, which means you don't have to have an FFL. It's pretty neat. So some of the early Swedish and the German production guns have a certain extra added value for that reason. But I thought I'd just share something with you. I've had these guns for quite some time. This one I picked up in a collection a few years ago because I thought the Gustav with the turn-down bolt was unique. This here Ljungman I picked up at a local pawn shop, Lord, 15 years ago? If not, it was more than 10. And I traded a, hard to remember because they also had an FN49, and I bought both within a few months of each other. They had this and the FN49, and I remember I traded a Walther Inner Arms US made PPKS for one, and I traded a Russian SVT40 308 for the other. And I really can't remember which was which, but either way I considered them to be excellent trades. Well, if you like this video, please click like. By the way, it does have a bolt hold open, even with the safety. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out our Patreon page. Also, feel free to check out our other videos. We have a large selection of old military guns as well as some newer guns. Pretty much anything with historical interest we try to get into. Well, this is Misha, and we'll catch you next time.